Chris. My name's actually Chris Gregorich. I actually run and own Capital City Martial Arts in Lansing, Michigan. We are a 501c nonprofit group that teaches historical martial arts. So we don't make money doing any of this now. I'd like to, but it ain't gonna happen. But we started this group about a year ago. December 10th, we'll be up and operating for 1 year. But our primary goal when we first started was bringing back Bartitsu. How many people know what Bartitsu is? Where have you heard it from?
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes. Isn't that what the guy from the Avengers did? Was with the umbrella and stuff?
From the original Avengers, yes.
Okay.
Yes, actually, it's starting, not those Avengers, not the Marvel Avengers. Back in the 60s and everything else, the original Avengers. Actually, the closest thing to it that you'd probably see nowadays, I can't even think of it. There was a movie that came out, The Kingsman.
Oh, yes.
Is probably the closest thing you would see to today. Bartitsu actually was a European martial art created in the late 1800s by a gentleman named Barton Wright. And he lived in Japan for 10 years, studied jiu-jitsu. He was an engineer. So he lived there for 10 years. He was born in India, which under that time was under British control. Moved around with his family, lived in Japan as an engineer. After 10 years, he kindly came back to England. Lived in London. While he was in London, he noticed that crime rate and everything, hooligans, a group called the French Apache, were basically running the towns. And he deemed that what people were doing then was just not safe anymore. So he devised a way to protect himself. He created a gentleman's fighting art. The reason he designed this is because guns were outlawed. You still couldn't use guns. You couldn't use swords anymore during the late 1800s. Early 1800s, not a problem. Late 1800s? No, you couldn't do it anymore. Dueling in the city and streets and blood everywhere just was not a cool thing anymore. So he developed a art, which he ended up naming it after himself, called Bartitsu. He took a combination of the jiu-jitsu he learned in Japan, old school English fisticuffs or bare knuckle boxing, some savate, and then he met a gentleman named Pierre Vignay. Pierre Vignay was a professor of savate in Lacan, French instructor, military academy, very highly decorated. He created something called Vignay-Lacan. Vignay-Lacan, you guys have all seen at the Steam Cons, I'm pretty sure, either by theatrical groups or somebody pretending to do it. I am right now the only instructor that is certified through the Bartitsu Society in Michigan. And there's only about 50 of us worldwide. But what he did is he opened a school called the Bartitsu School of Arms in 1899. He brought in some of the best instructors from around. He would fly in the Japanese instructors to teach jiu-jitsu. He taught pugilism himself. He hired on as one of his board of directors, Pierre Vignay, to teach cane. He had a Swiss instructor teach wrestling, grappling. He also hired a gentleman named Captain Alfred Hutton. Captain Alfred Hutton was in his later years of life. He was a historical fencer and taught historical fencing at the school also. Now the school was promoted as top of the line gymnasium. It was sent out to the rich. It was for the upper class. They wanted the upper class gentlemen because they would pay the money. So they do classes and stuff, and unfortunately though, the school only lasted 3 years. 1899 to 1902. That's it. Done. Rumors have it that Barton Wright was very bad with money. There was rumors that he overpriced everybody out. Or it could have been the problem that this is a gentleman that would treat people in his gymnasium with electrical therapy and radiation therapy. and not be a doctor. You'll hear a lot of people talk about Mr. Wright, that his theories were great. He was a great engineer. He was linear than a bend. But the problem is with the radiation and what he created and was treating people, actually some of that technology is now used today. Doesn't get credit for it, but the idea was there. When you guys have gone and seen Bartitsu, what do you guys usually see? The cane?
Mm-hmm.
That like cane work? Okay. With the Bartitsu and stuff in the gymnasium and stuff, it actually, with that history in 3 years, you know, it doesn't matter if it lasted or it disappeared, it had a big influence into a lot of different things. Towards the end of the school time, there was several instructors, their wives were actually students, that ended up going out with their husbands after the school closed and opened their own jiu-jitsu gymnasiums. Or Pierre Vignier had his own schools. But a lot of their wives and stuff would actually start teaching women suffragettes during that time. So during the women's movement during that time, these women were being trained to beat up cops. Yeah, but the cops during that time weren't that great either.
All the more reason.
All the more the reason.
Shit.
So Bartitsu may have been a history thing that came in and disappeared, but it helped a lot of other movements go forward. Now, in 1902, the school closed, disappeared. Barton Wright, nowhere to really be found. He died in 1954. 2 years later after the school, Conan Arthur Doyle wrote Sherlock Holmes. And there's a passage in it that talks about how he beat Moriarty with Bartitsu. He misspelled it. We don't know why. Through the Bartitsu Society, there's no reason, no rhyme. If he was trying to keep himself separate, not to get sued, whatever. So that stayed immortalized until about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, actually, early 2000s. Then there was a martial artist named Tony Wolfe and an author named Will Thomas. These gentlemen, one was from the Netherlands, and then she lived in Chicago. The other one lives in, I think, Missouri now. Doing the research on their own. Never knew each other. Researching the same thing. What the hell is Bartitsu? Well, lo and behold, they found out. It's a real thing. Pearson magazine in the early 1900s posted tons and tons of Barton Wright's articles. So over a period of 5 years, these gentlemen actually compiled the compendiums. There's 2 Bartitsu compendiums out now. They were published in 2005 and the second one in 2008. These detail how Bartitsu works. So that started the revolution of what you guys are starting to see. Tony Wolfe has done tons and tons of demos at SteamCons through the years. Out west, there's a gentleman named Tom Badillo. Anybody seen Victorian Tomorrow on Netflix?
Not yet. It's on my list.
Anybody know about Victorian Tomorrow on
No,
Netflix?
but it's on Netflix. I will.
If you have Netflix, there is a documentary called Victorian Tomorrow.
Vintage.
Vintage. Is it Vintage Tomorrow? Vintage
Yes.
Tomorrow.
It looks awesome.
And it details a lot of the Victorian age. But also, there's a great section from a friend of mine from Tom Badillo doing a Bartitsu demonstration. So Bartitsu is becoming more in the mainstream, and it will continue to be in the mainstream. We teach it as a once-a-week class with historical fencing. So we do cane fencing. Give me the other one. No, let's spare this. That one. If I'm going to hit you, I'm not going to hit you with that one. Let me see that one. Actually. What you guys probably have seen is the cane work. This is a training cane. This is what we use to actually hit each other in class on purpose. They're actually made of rattan. They're not dowels. They're not wood dowels that you go buy at Home Depot. This is rattan. Rattan is a naturally grown material. These have had the skins shaved off them and a solid rubber ball on top. Now, these were actually the same way they trained in actually his school, except it was called Malacca cane. If you go to Europe, this is what they sell as Malacca cane and not rattan cane. this is what they were training for. Vignier designed his own cane out of hickory, oak, with a solid brass top on it. So instead of you guys, everybody seeing like everybody fencing, you know, how you see fencers, he designed it for the other end to be used. So he designed it, I need to move away from this wall, to be everything to be up overhead, and now we're going to swing it like a mace. So we're not using a sword anymore. We're, do that drill. Get that arm up. Get the arm up. There you go. Gary's been doing this only for 3 weeks. So, he's gotten better. It was designed to be swung like a mace. It was not designed to be, there is a system in France called le cane. Savate practitioners use it. It's used like a sword. It's used just like a sword. Vignier decided that that was not practical in Europe. Because if anybody, fencing back then was just huge. So other people who have other canes, they're going to fence just like that for you. So he designed a method that was strictly for damage, for hurting people, for saving your lives. He would go into the lower parts of London on purpose to pick fights to make sure this worked. Bartitsu and Edward Barton Wright loved this so much that he said, come here, be on my board of directors and teach this. So anytime you look up Professor Vignier, you always see Bartitsu. Always will. The idea of it, though, don't worry about it, I'm not going to hit you. Put your hand down very quick. Just put your arm down. Hold on. The idea is to take a brass mallet and go for the head.
Oof.
Both ways. Or the knees. Or, if his arms are up, the rib cage, the lower part, the floating ribs.
Mm-hmm.
But he also designed a move for over the head that fencing doesn't do. Fencers always have what's called a high guard. It's up here. Okay? I can't hit him this way with a fence. I can now.
Mm-hmm.
He designed that because solid brass, metal, steel, whatever it was, your head's connected in plates at the top of your head. Well, what would happen if a metal ball hit you? I've heard ooh and ah and ohs a lot today. So that was designed for battle. It was designed to swing and hit people that way.